Admiral Du Young stared at the application floating on his holographic screen. His office, high in the Stellar Combat Academy's crystal tower, gave him a perfect view of the three suns setting over the horizon. But today, he couldn't enjoy the view. The application before him had thrown the entire academy into chaos. A human, he said out loud, even though no one else was in the room. They barely have ships that can reach their own moon. The door chimed, and Instructor Yuna walked in. She was one of the youngest teachers at the academy, known for her fresh ideas and open mind. "Admiral, I see you've received Han Te's application." "This must be a joke," Du Young said, waving his hand through the hologram. "The Stellar Combat Academy has trained the galaxy's finest warriors for 3,000 years. We've never accepted a species that hasn't mastered faster-than-light travel." Yuna pulled up another hologram, this one showing videos from Earth. "Sir, please watch this." The first video showed human soldiers working together to overcome a challenge course. The second showed their sports competitions. The third displayed their historical battles. More and more videos played, each showing humans adapting, working together, and winning against impossible odds. "They're physically weak," Du Young said, but his voice had less certainty now. "Yes," Yuna agreed, "but look at how they solve problems. While the Cracks use strength and the Valerians use speed, humans use their minds. They see patterns others miss. They try new things. They never give up." "The board will never agree," Du Young said, but he kept watching the videos. "The board is meeting right now," Yuna said with a small smile. "They're discussing it very loudly." In the main meeting hall, 12 board members from different species argued. Their voices echoed off the ancient walls, where paintings showed 3,000 years of academy history. "Ridiculous," shouted board member Ka, his scaled skin turning dark red with anger. "They don't even have natural armor." "They can't breathe underwater," said another member, waving her fins. "But look at their test scores," said a third, pointing to Han Ta's results. "The humans solve the tactical problems in ways we've never seen before." The argument continued until Admiral Du Young entered the room. Everyone fell silent. "I have reviewed the application," he said slowly, "and I have watched recordings of human adaptation and problem-solving." He paused, looking at each board member. "Our academy's purpose is not just to train the strongest or the fastest," he continued. "We train the best, and sometimes the best come in unexpected forms." "You can't be serious," Kay said. "They'll never survive the physical training." "Then we'll adapt the training," Yuna said from behind Du Young. No one had noticed her enter. "Just as humans adapt to every challenge they face." She stepped forward and played one final video. It showed humans on Earth training in different environments. Desert, Arctic, underwater, mountains. It showed them inventing tools, creating solutions, working together to overcome their limitations. 3,000 years ago, she said, this academy was created to find the best warriors in the galaxy. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but the best. Han Te's application shows us something new, something different. Isn't that exactly what we need? The room fell silent again. Board members looked at each other, then at the videos still playing. Finally, Du Young spoke. "All in favor of accepting our first human student?" Hands, claws, and tentacles raised one by one. Even Ka, after a long moment, raised his scaled hand. "Then it's decided," Du Young said. He pressed his palm to the acceptance panel. "Send the message. Tell Han Ta to prepare for the next term." As the board members left, Yuna stayed behind with Du Young. "This will change everything," she said. "Yes," Du Young agreed, watching the last sunset. "But maybe that's exactly what we need." In his small apartment on Earth, Han Ta was sleeping when his computer beeped. He jumped up and read the message, his eyes growing wide. Application status: accepted. Institution: Stellar Combat Academy. Note: please prepare for immediate departure. Transport will arrive in 7 Earth days. Special notice: As our first human student, you will be part of history. Han Ta sat back in his chair, his heart racing. He looked out his window at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, the galaxy's most advanced battle academy was preparing for his arrival. He had no idea that they were just as nervous about it as he was. Han Ta stepped out of the transport ship and into the main hall of the Stellar Combat Academy. His legs felt wobbly after the long journey through space. The hall was massive, with ceilings that seemed to reach into forever. Students of different species walked, floated, and sometimes flew past him. A tall student with metallic skin walked straight through a wall. Another breathed fire while talking to friends. A group of students were lifting training weights that looked heavier than Earth cars. Han Ta swallowed hard. "Welcome to the academy," said a familiar voice. Instructor Yuna approached him with a warm smile. "How was your journey?" "Long," Han Ta said, trying not to stare at a student who had just turned invisible. "But amazing." "Your first class starts in 1 hour," Yuna said. "The physical assessment arena." Han Ta nodded, gripping his bag tighter. He followed Yuna through corridors that changed color as they walked, past training rooms where students practiced with energy weapons and gravity controls. In the locker room, Han Ta changed into the academy's training uniform. It felt strange against his skin, like liquid metal that had somehow become cloth. He looked in the mirror and tried to stand tall. "So this is the human," a voice said behind him. Han Ta turned to see a student with perfect posture and fierce eyes. "I am Jin Ho, top of the combat class." Jin Ho's species, the Stellar Warriors, were famous for their natural combat abilities and enhanced strength. He looked at Han Ta like someone might look at an interesting bug. "I've studied your species," Jin Ho continued. "No natural armor, no enhanced abilities, no genetic improvements." He shook his head. "This academy is for the galaxy's elite warriors, not," he paused, "primitives." Han Ta felt his face get hot, but he remembered what his mother always said. Actions speak louder than words. He simply nodded to Jin Ho and walked to the assessment arena. The arena was a huge room that could change its environment instantly. Today, it looked like a basic training ground with obstacles and targets. Students gathered around as Instructor Yuna explained the test. "You must cross the arena, hit all targets, and reach the other side," she said. "Use any abilities or methods you have. You have 5 minutes." Jin Ho went first. He moved like lightning, his enhanced strength letting him jump over walls, and his natural armor protecting him from the practice shots fired by training robots. He finished in 2 minutes. Other students showed their abilities. One phased through obstacles. Another used telepathy to control the robots. A third created energy shields. Then it was Han Ta's turn. "Begin," Yuna said. Han Ta didn't move immediately. He watched the pattern of the robot shots. He studied the obstacles. Other students started to whisper and laugh. Then he moved. He couldn't jump over walls, so he found gaps. He couldn't phase through obstacles, so he used them as cover. He couldn't control the robots, so he predicted their patterns. When practice shots came at him, he was already moving to his next position. Han Ta remembered his Earth training. Use the environment. Think ahead. Never stop adapting. He reached the other side with 10 seconds left. The arena was silent. Even Jin Ho looked surprised. "Interesting," Yuna said, making notes on her tablet. "You didn't use any enhanced abilities." "Humans don't have any," Han Ta said, still catching his breath. "We just have to think differently." "That's exactly what we were counting on," Yuna said with a smile. She turned to the class. "Today's lesson. There's more than one way to solve a problem." Jin Ho used strength. Others used their special abilities. Han Ta used strategy and observation. She walked to the center of the arena. "From now on, training will be different. You'll learn to fight without your natural abilities. Because one day, you might need to." As students left the arena, Han Ta noticed Jin Ho watching him with a thoughtful expression. Later, in his room, Han Ta looked out his window at the 3 moons rising over the academy. His muscles ached, but he felt proud. He hadn't won the assessment. Jin Ho's time was much better. But he had finished it. He had shown that humans belonged here. His computer beeped with a message from Instructor Yuna. Tomorrow, tactical training. Your species' specialty. Be ready. Han Ta smiled. Maybe being different wasn't such a bad thing after all. The tactical training room looked nothing like Han Ta expected. Instead of computers or simulators, it was completely empty except for a floating ball of light in the center. Today, Instructor Yuna announced, we study space combat tactics. She waved her hand, and the room transformed. Suddenly, they were standing in what looked like open space, surrounded by stars and distant planets. Han Tai reached out to touch a passing asteroid, but his hand went right through it. A perfect hologram. Each of you will command a fleet, Yuna continued. Your goal is to protect your home planet from an invasion force. She looked at Han Ta. Since we have a human student, we'll use human ships today. Several students groaned. Jin Ho, standing nearby, crossed his arms. Human ships are primitive, he said. They don't even have consciousness links or quantum drives. Exactly, Yuna smiled. Sometimes the simplest tools require the smartest solutions. The room divided into sections, giving each student their own space battle to command. Han Ta found himself looking at a fleet of Earth-style ships. They were small and basic compared to the advanced alien ships he'd seen, but they felt familiar. Begin, Yuna said. The enemy fleet appeared. Huge ships with advanced weapons. Han Ta's Earth ships looked tiny in comparison, but he remembered his history lessons. Position ships in groups of 3, he commanded. The holographic ships moved according to his words. Other students stared as he continued giving orders. Why are you spreading them out? Jin Ho asked from his section. His ships were all grouped together in a standard attack formation. Watch, Han Ta said. The enemy ships attacked. In Jin Ho's section, they faced his fleet head-on. The battle was quick and fierce. Jin Ho's strong attack strategy worked well, but he lost many ships. In Han Ta's section, something different happened. His spread-out ships forced the enemy to divide their attention. When the large enemy ships turned to attack one group, they exposed their weak spots to another. Han Ta's ships might be smaller, but they were faster and more numerous. This is how humans fought in our ancient seas, Han Ta explained as his ships darted around the enemy. Small ships working together can defeat bigger ones by being clever and coordinated. Yuna walked between the battle sections, nodding. Notice how Han Ta uses the enemy's strength against them. Their big ships are powerful, but slow to turn. His smaller ships can attack from multiple angles. Other students began to watch Han Ta's battle. Even Jin Ho looked interested. But that's not how modern space battles work, one student said. Isn't it? Yuna asked. Whether your ships are connected to your mind or powered by fusion, the basic principles of strategy don't change. Position, timing, using your enemy's weakness. Han Ta's fleet finished their mission with minimal losses. The hologram faded, leaving the room empty again. Tomorrow, Yuna announced, we'll try the same exercise. But this time, you'll command ships you're not familiar with. Because in real combat, you can't always choose your tools. As students left the room, Jin Ho approached Han Ta. Your strategy, he said slowly, as if the words were difficult. It was effective. Thanks, Han Ta replied. Your attack formation was impressive too. Maybe we could combine them somehow. Jin Ho looked surprised at the suggestion, but then nodded slightly. Perhaps. Later that day, Admiral Du Young called Han Ta to his office. The Admiral was watching recordings of the tactical training. Interesting approach, Du Young said. You didn't just rely on the ship's capabilities. You used the space itself as a weapon. On Earth, we learned to use whatever advantages we could find. Han Ta explained. When you're not the strongest or fastest, you have to be smarter. Do Yum nodded. The Academy's traditional training focuses on using superior technology and natural abilities. But your methods, he paused. They could work with any ships, any species. That's the point, sir, Han Ta said. Good strategy works no matter what tools you have. Indeed. Du Young turned off the recording. Keep thinking differently, Han Ta. The Academy needs new perspectives. That night, Han Ta received messages from several classmates asking about Earth military history. Even Jin Ho sent a short message. Training room. Tomorrow morning, before class, bring your tactical ideas. Han Ta smiled. Maybe being the only human at the Academy wasn't just about proving humans belonged here. Maybe it was about showing everyone that different didn't mean worse. Sometimes it meant better. The training hall buzzed with excitement. Word had spread quickly through the Academy. Jin Ho had challenged Han Ta to a combat trial. Students packed the viewing areas, eager to see the top-ranked warrior face the human newcomer. You don't have to do this, Instructor Yuna told Han Ta as he prepared. Combat trials are traditional, but not required. I know, Han Ta said, checking his training suit. But I need to show I belong here. The combat arena activated, creating a landscape of various terrains: forest, rocky hills, open fields, and urban ruins. Jin Ho stood at one end, his natural armor gleaming. Han Ta took his position at the other end. Combat trial rules, announced the referee. No lethal force. No permanent damage. Victory by surrender or incapacitation. Begin. Jin Ho moved first, his enhanced speed making him almost blur. He charged straight at Han Ta, expecting an easy victory. But Han Ta wasn't there anymore. The human had immediately rolled behind a broken wall in the urban section. Jin Ho's charge missed. Stop hiding, Jin Ho called out. Face me directly. Why? Han Ta's voice came from somewhere in the ruins. Because that's what you're good at. I'd rather play to my strengths. The crowd watched as Han Ta used the environment to his advantage. When Jin Ho entered the ruins, Han Ta was already moving to the forest. When Jin Ho followed, Han Ta led him through dense trees that slowed his opponent's speed. Fascinating, Admiral Du Young said from the observation deck. The human isn't trying to match Jin Ho's abilities. He's making Jin Ho fight on his terms. In the arena, Jin Ho was getting frustrated. His superior strength and speed meant nothing if he couldn't catch his opponent. He'd never fought someone who simply refused to fight the way he expected. This isn't real combat, Jin Ho shouted, smashing through a tree in anger. Really? Han Ta called back. Because on Earth, this is exactly how we fight stronger opponents. We use the environment. We stay mobile. We wait for the right moment. The right moment came when Jin Ho's frustration made him careless. He charged through the forest without checking his surroundings. Han Ta had led him to the rocky hills, where loose stones covered the ground. Jin Ho slipped on the loose rocks. His momentum and strength, usually advantages, worked against him. He fell hard. Before he could recover, Han Ta was there. He didn't try to overpower Jin Ho. Instead, he used a simple earth martial arts hold, using Jin Ho's own weight and position to pin him. The crowd went silent. Jin Ho struggled, but the more he used his strength, the more the hold tightened. It was like fighting water. No matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't break free. I yield, Jin Ho said finally. The referee ended the match. The crowd erupted in shocked conversations. Han Ta helped Jin Ho up. How? Jin Ho asked. You're not stronger than me. You're not faster. I didn't try to be, Han Ta explained. Humans learned long ago that we can't always overpower our opponents, so we learn to outsmart them instead. Admiral Du Young approached them, followed by several instructors. An impressive display, he said. Both of you. He turned to address all the students. Today's match taught us something important. Raw power isn't everything. Strategy, adaptation, and using your environment can overcome superior strength and speed. Sir, Jin-Ho said, surprising everyone, I request permission to train with Han-Ta. Do-Young raised an eyebrow. Oh, his methods are different, but effective. Perhaps combining our approaches would make both of us stronger. Han-Ta grinned. I'd like that. Your direct attack style is amazing. It just needs some flexibility to be unbeatable. That evening, as students left the training hall, many stayed to watch Han-Ta and Jin-Ho begin their joint training. The human showed the warrior how to move more efficiently, while Jin-Ho helped Han-Ta understand how to better handle opponents with enhanced abilities. In his office, Admiral Do-Young watched them on the monitors. Instructor Yuna stood beside him. This is changing everything, she said. Students are starting to question traditional combat methods. They're combining different styles, adapting new approaches. Good, Do-Young replied. Because out there in the galaxy, the enemy won't always fight the way we expect. We need warriors who can think differently. He smiled. Maybe we needed a human to teach us that. 3 months into the term, Instructor Yuna called an emergency meeting with Admiral Do-Young. She brought videos of recent training sessions that showed something surprising. Watch this, she said, playing the first video. It showed students failing basic combat exercises. Even Jin-Ho was struggling. Their performance is getting worse. Do-Young asked, frowning. No, Yuna smiled. They're struggling because they're trying new things. Look closer. The second video showed the same students in their free training time. Jin-Ho was teaching others how to move like Han-Ta had during their combat trial. Another student, who could fly naturally, was practicing ground combat. A telepathic student was learning to fight without using their mental powers. They're practicing without their natural abilities, Do-Young realized. Exactly. They've learned from Han-Ta that relying only on their strengths makes them vulnerable. But our traditional training, Yuna paused. It doesn't support this kind of learning. Just then, Han-Ta knocked on the office door. They had called him in to discuss an idea. You wanted to see me, sir? He asked. Yes, Do-Young said. We need your help to redesign our training program. Han-Ta's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a first-year student. A first-year student who has changed how our best students think about combat, Yuna said. Tell us about Earth's military training. Han-Ta thought for a moment. Well, on Earth, we train for everything. Not just our strengths. If someone's good at shooting, we make them run. If they're good at running, we make them swim. If they're good at everything, we blindfold them. Blindfold them? Do-Young asked, surprised. Yes, because you never know what abilities you might lose in real combat. So you need to be ready for anything. Yuna nodded excitedly. That's exactly what we need. A training program that challenges everyone's weaknesses, not just their strengths. Over the next few days, Han-Ta worked with Yuna to create new training exercises. They combined Earth's military training with alien combat techniques. They designed programs that forced students to fight without their special abilities. The first new training session was chaos. This is impossible, complained a student who could usually phase through walls. The training room was blocking their power, forcing them to climb over obstacles instead. That's the point, Han-Ta explained. What happens if you fight someone who can block your phasing ability? You need a backup plan. Jin-Ho, surprisingly, became one of the biggest supporters of the new training. In our last match, he told complaining students, I lost because I relied too much on strength and speed. Han-Ta showed me that true warriors must be ready for anything. The Academy's training rooms were reprogrammed. Now they could switch off different alien abilities, forcing students to adapt. The combat simulations became more complex, mixing different fighting styles and situations. One day, during a new training exercise, Admiral Do-Young watched a remarkable scene. A flying student was teaching Han-Ta how to predict air attacks. Nearby, Han-Ta was showing them Earth martial arts moves for ground combat. Jin Ho was working with a telepathic student, each learning to fight without their main advantages. "It's like watching the future of the academy," Yuma said, standing beside him. "The future of warfare itself," Du Young corrected. "Out there, we won't always fight enemies who play to our strengths. We need warriors who can adapt." The results came faster than anyone expected. In just 1 month, overall combat scores improved by 40%. Students who mastered multiple fighting styles started winning against those who relied only on their natural abilities. Even the most traditional teachers couldn't argue with these results. The Academy's ancient training programs were officially updated to include the new methods. "Humans have a saying," Han Ta told his class one day. "The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle." "An odd saying," Jin Ho commented, "but wise, like many human things." That evening, Han Ta received a message from Earth. More humans had applied to the Academy for the next term. And this time, no one on the board opposed their applications. In his office, Admiral Du Young looked at the training scores and smiled. Sometimes, he realized, the best way to honor a 3,000-year tradition was to let it evolve. The Academy wasn't just teaching anymore, it was learning too. The Academy's main hall was packed with students. Admiral Du Young stood on the central platform, his face serious. "Today's test is different," he announced. "We face a simulated crisis that no class has ever solved. You have 1 day to prepare. Choose your teams wisely." The room buzzed with excitement. The annual crisis simulation was famous, or rather, infamous. It was a test that combined every aspect of combat and strategy. No team had ever achieved more than a 60% success rate. Han Ta, Jin Ho called out as students began forming teams. "Join us." Han Ta looked surprised. Jin Ho had gathered some of the best students. Min Ki, who could control energy fields, Song Ha, who could see through walls, and Yu Jin, who could communicate with machines. They were all top-ranked warriors. "Are you sure?" Han Ta asked. "I'm still just a first-year student." "A first-year student who changed how we all fight," Jin Ho said. "We need your different way of thinking." They spent the day preparing. Unlike other teams that practiced combat moves, Han Ta's team studied each other's strengths and weaknesses. They created backup plans for every scenario. They practiced fighting without their special abilities. The next morning, all teams entered the simulation chamber. The room transformed into a massive space station under attack. "Your mission," Admiral Du Young's voice announced, "is to defend this station against unknown enemies while evacuating 10,000 civilians. The station's systems are failing. You have 2 hours." The simulation began. Alarms blared. Emergency lights flashed. Holographic civilians ran in panic. Other teams immediately split up to handle different tasks. But Han Ta's team stayed together. "Remember the plan," Han Ta said. "No one fights alone." They moved through the station as a unit. When energy creatures attacked, Min Ki didn't just use his powers to fight them. He worked with Yu Jin to redirect the station's energy systems, weakening the creatures. When they found damaged areas blocking evacuation routes, Song Ha didn't just look through walls to find trapped civilians. She guided Han Ta and Jin Ho to create new paths using the station's own debris. "Section 3 is clear," Jin Ho reported. "But the main reactor is failing." "That's not part of the simulation," an instructor's voice cut in. "It's a real system error. We need to stop the test." "Wait," Han Ta said. "We can use this." He turned to his team. "The simulation enemies are powered by the station's training systems. If the reactor fails, they'll lose power too." Yu Jin finished. "But so will life's support." "Not if we do this right," Han Ta said. He looked at each team member. "Trust me." They nodded. What happened next amazed everyone watching. Han Ta's team let the reactor fail, but in a controlled way. They used Min Ki's energy control to direct the power surge. Song has spotted safe routes through walls. Yu Jin communicated with backup systems. Jin Ho's strength and Han Ta's strategy protected evacuating civilians. The simulation enemies, powered by the main systems, started shutting down. The team used the confusion to complete the evacuation. When the simulation ended, everyone stared at the score display. CCS rate, 89%. Niyivu ACADEMOI record. Admiral Do Young's voice shook slightly as he announced, "Simulation complete. All civilians saved, station preserved, and a new approach we've never seen before." In the control room, Instructor Yuna was grinning. "They didn't just beat the simulation," she said. "They changed how it worked, used a system error as an advantage. Like humans using an enemy's strength against them." Du Young nodded. "But they did more than that. Each team member adapted, supported each other, fought differently." Later, as teams discussed the simulation, Jin Ho approached Han Ta. "I used to think being the strongest meant fighting alone," he said, "but today showed me that true strength is knowing when to rely on others." Han Ta smiled. "On Earth, we learned that lesson through thousands of years of warfare. No one, no matter how strong, wins by themselves." That evening, Admiral Du Young made another announcement. The crisis simulation would be redesigned. Future tests would focus less on individual powers and more on teamwork, adaptation, and creative thinking. "Today," he said, "we saw the future of galactic combat. Not warriors fighting alone with their special abilities, but teams working together, adapting to any situation, turning weaknesses into strengths." He looked directly at Han Ta's team. "Sometimes the best solutions come from those we least expect. Remember that lesson well." News of the record-breaking crisis simulation spread quickly through the academy. But not everyone was happy about it. A group of senior instructors called an emergency meeting with Admiral Du Young. "This is not what the academy stands for," said Master Q, the oldest instructor. His holographic form flickered with anger. "For 3,000 years, we have trained warriors to master their natural abilities. Now we teach them to ignore their gifts." "Not ignore," Instructor Yuna argued. "Expand beyond them." The meeting room was tense. On one side sat the traditional instructors, their faces stern. On the other side stood Yuna, Admiral Du Young, and surprisingly, Jin Ho's father, General Li, who had traveled from their homeworld after hearing about the changes. "My son tells me he is becoming a better warrior," General Li said slowly. "Not just stronger, but smarter, more adaptable." "With all respect," Master Q replied, "humans have no place teaching combat to advanced species. They are too." He paused, searching for a polite word. "Primitive." Han Ta's voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned to see him standing there with Jin Ho and their team. Admiral Du Young had called them to the meeting, but no one expected them to arrive so early. "Show them," Jin Ho said to Han Ta. Han Ta stepped forward and activated the room's holographic display. Images appeared showing recent training results, not just their crisis simulation score, but everything. "Combat effectiveness up 40%, Han Ta pointed out. Emergency response times improved by 35%. Survival rates in advanced simulations increased by 50%. He changed the display to show students training. "Look at how they fight now. Not just with their powers, but with strategy, with backup plans, with teamwork." In real combat, Jin Ho added, "We won't always face enemies who fight fair, who let us use our strengths. The old ways taught us to be powerful. The new ways teach us to be unstoppable." Master Q stood up, his holographic form growing larger. "You dare to question 3,000 years of tradition?" "No," Han Ta said calmly. "We honor that tradition by making it stronger, by helping it grow." Yu Jin stepped forward, her ability to talk to machines making the holographic displays dance with data. The first Academy Masters wrote that true combat excellence comes from constant evolution, from learning new ways to fight. They also wrote, Songha added, reading the ancient texts through the walls of the Academy Library with her special sight, that the greatest warriors are those who can fight in any condition, with any weapon, against any enemy. Min-Ki spoke up, his energy-controlling abilities making the lights flicker slightly. Isn't that exactly what we're learning now? Admiral Du Young smiled. These students working together, using their abilities in new ways while arguing for change. They were proving their point better than any debate could. General Li stood up. My people have been warriors for 10,000 years, he said. We thought we knew everything about combat. But watching my son's training videos, seeing how he combines our traditional strength with new strategies. He turned to Master Q. We were wrong. The room fell silent. General Li's people were legendary warriors. His support changed everything. Perhaps, Master Q said finally, his hologram shrinking back to normal size, we should observe these new training methods more closely. Over the next few weeks, even the traditional instructors had to admit the results were impressive. Students were not just passing tests. They were finding new ways to solve old problems. They were becoming warriors who could fight in any situation. One evening, Han Ta found a message on his computer. It was from Master Q. In 3,000 years of teaching, I have never seen students so eager to learn, to adapt, to grow beyond their limits. I was wrong about humans. Your people's greatest strength is not in your bodies, but in your ability to make others see new possibilities. Continue teaching us. Han Ta showed the message to Jin Ho during their evening training session. You've changed everything, Jin Ho said, practicing an earth martial arts move. The academy, the students, even the masters. No, Han Ta replied, helping Jin Ho adjust his stance. We changed everything. Together, just like humans learned on Earth. Real progress doesn't come from fighting alone. It comes from learning from each other. The ancient challenge room had been sealed for 500 years. No student had ever completed its trial, a test so difficult that it became legend. Now, as Han Ta and his team stood before its massive doors, even Jin Ho looked nervous. Admiral Du Young stepped forward. No team has ever succeeded here. The last attempt was 300 years ago. Are you sure you want to try? Han Ta looked at his teammates, Jin Ho, Min Ki, Song Ha, and Yu Jin. They nodded. We're sure, Han Ta said. The ancient doors opened with a deep rumble. Inside, the chamber was completely dark. As they entered, lights slowly came on, revealing a massive space that seemed to stretch forever. The trial begins, a voice echoed through the chamber. Face your greatest weaknesses. Save those who cannot be saved. Defeat what cannot be defeated. The chamber transformed. They found themselves in a burning city. Holographic civilians ran in panic. Strange shadow creatures attacked from all directions. The ground shook with explosions. Our powers aren't working. Min Ki shouted, trying to control the energy around them. Nothing happened. The chamber blocks all special abilities. Yuna's voice explained from somewhere above. You must rely on your basic training. Shadow creatures surrounded them. Jin Ho tried to fight one with his usual strength, but without his enhanced abilities, his punch went right through it. Wait, Han Ta called out. Remember our training. We practiced for this. He was right. For months, they had trained without their powers, learning to fight in new ways. Now that training would be tested. Song Ha, Jin Ho, protect the civilians. Han Ta ordered. Min Ki, Yu Jin, with me. They moved as one unit. Song Ha and Jin Ho used the defensive techniques Han Ta had taught them, guiding civilians to safety without relying on their special abilities. Min Ki and Yu Jin worked with Han Ta to study the shadow creatures' patterns. They're not random, Han Ta realized. They're attacking in sequences, like a combat exercise. Understanding the pattern changed everything. The team adapted their strategy. Instead of trying to fight the shadows directly, they used the environment, just as Han Ta had done in his first combat trial with Jin Ho. They led the shadows into traps. They used the burning buildings to their advantage. They turned the creatures' attacks against each other. But the trial wasn't over. The chamber shifted again. Now they faced a massive fortress that had to be captured, then a viral outbreak that had to be contained. Each challenge seemed impossible. This is why no one ever succeeded, Jin-Ho said during a brief pause between challenges. Each task requires different abilities we don't have right now. No, Han-Tae replied. Each task requires us to think differently, to adapt, to work together. He gathered the team. We've been training for exactly this, not to be the strongest or fastest, but to be the most adaptable, to find solutions no one else sees. The final challenge appeared. A giant creature, made of pure energy, threatened to destroy everything. It seemed to absorb every attack, grow stronger with every defeat. How do we fight something that gets stronger when we fight it? Min-Ki asked. Han-Ta watched the creature carefully. Maybe we don't fight it at all. He explained his plan quickly. It was crazy, dangerous, and completely against traditional combat training. It was also exactly what they needed. The team approached the energy creature, but instead of attacking, they surrounded it in a circle. They used the defensive movements they had learned, redirecting its energy rather than trying to stop it. The creature attacked, but each team member moved in perfect sync, flowing like water around its strikes. Just as Han-Ta had learned in Earth martial arts, they used the opponent's strength against itself. The creature's energy began to spiral, caught in the pattern of their movement. It tried to absorb their attacks, but they weren't attacking. It tried to grow stronger, but there was no resistance to grow against. Finally, unable to handle its own redirected power, the creature collapsed in on itself and vanished. The chamber fell silent. Then the ancient voice spoke again. Trial complete. First successful attempt in Academy history. The lights came back on. Admiral Du Young, Instructor Yuna, and even Master Q stood at the entrance, their faces showing amazement. How? Master Q asked. How did you succeed where every other team failed? Han-Ta looked at his team, no longer just classmates, but true warriors who had learned to fight in ways the Academy had never seen before. Because we didn't try to be the strongest, he said. We learned to be the most adaptable. And that makes all the difference. The graduation ceremony of the Stellar Combat Academy was always spectacular. But this year it was different. The Great Hall was packed not just with students and teachers, but with military leaders from across the galaxy. They had all come to see the class that had changed everything. Admiral Du Young stood at the central platform, his uniform gleaming under the light of 3 setting suns streaming through the crystal walls. When this term began, he said, we thought we were simply accepting our first human student. Instead, we began a revolution in how we train warriors. The holographic displays showed highlights from the year. Han-Ta's first combat trial with Jin-Ho, the record-breaking crisis simulation, and most importantly, the first ever completion of the Ancient Chambers trial. But today, Du Young continued, we celebrate more than just success. We celebrate change. Jin-Ho stepped up to speak next. As the top-ranked student, it was his traditional right to give a graduation speech. A year ago, he said, looking at his classmates, I thought I knew what made a great warrior. Strength, speed, natural abilities. He paused, looking at Han-Ta. I was wrong. The hall was silent as Jin-Ho continued. Our human classmate taught us that true combat excellence isn't about being the strongest or fastest. It's about being the most adaptable, about thinking differently, about working together. Master Q, who had once opposed all these changes, now stood to make a surprising announcement. The Academy Board has voted, he said, his holographic form glowing with pride. From now on, all training will include the new methods we learned this year. Every student will learn to fight both with and without their natural abilities. Every warrior will train in adaptation and teamwork. Cheers filled the hall. Even the visiting military leaders nodded in approval. Then came the biggest surprise. Admiral Du Young revealed a list of new applications for the next term. Hundreds of humans had applied, along with species that had never before considered the Academy. "We once thought we were accepting a student from a primitive species," Du Young said. "Instead, we found teachers who showed us new ways to be strong." Han Ta sat with his team, remembering everything they had been through. The struggles, the victories, the moments when everything seemed impossible until they found a new way forward. Instructor Yuna approached their group with news that made them all smile. Their team's training methods were being adopted by military academies across the galaxy. The idea of training without relying on special abilities, of learning to adapt and work together, was spreading. But the best part, Yuna said, is what's happening in the younger classes. She showed them videos of new students training. Species that once refused to work together now train side by side. Students who once relied only on their natural powers now practiced earth martial arts. Traditional warriors learned human strategic thinking. The ceremony continued with the presentation of graduation badges. When Han Ta received his, the entire hall stood in respect. Not because he was human, but because he had helped create something new. Later, at the celebration, Jin Ho found Han Ta looking out at the 3 moons rising over the academy. "What are you thinking about?" Jin Ho asked. "About my first day here," Han Ta replied. "How everything seemed impossible. How different everything is now." "You changed us," Jin Ho said. "No," Han Ta smiled. "We changed each other. Humans learned long ago that real progress comes from working together, from learning from each other. We just helped the Academy remember that lesson." As the celebration continued, Admiral Du Young made one final announcement. The Academy's name was being changed to reflect its new direction. It would now be known as the Galactic Adaptive Combat Academy. "Because true strength," he said, "comes not from what we are born with, but from how we learn and grow together." That night, as students celebrated and said goodbyes, Han Ta received a message from Earth. More humans had been accepted for the next term, but more importantly, the Academy's new training methods were being shared with Earth's military schools. The exchange of knowledge would go both ways now. Just as humans had learned from advanced species, now those species were learning from humans. In his office, Admiral Du Young looked at a new plaque on the wall. It showed Earth martial arts moves alongside traditional alien combat forms. Below it were written words that would guide the Academy for generations to come. "True warriors are not born. They are forged in the fires of challenge, tempered by wisdom from all worlds, and strengthened by the bonds they forge together."